to me, to me. My guest today is Bridget Finklaire. Bridget is a British author and spiritual teacher who lives in South Africa. By training, she's a psychotherapist and a hypnotherapist who started out in London. Bridget has been on a lifelong spiritual journey and now teaches the Bone Circle, which is her own program for positive transformation, which helps people to discover their passion and soul purpose and overcome unhelpful patterns of thinking and behaving. She also runs a study group for the Book of Knowledge, Keys of Enoch by Dr. J.J. Hurtak. Bridget recently wrote a novel called Red Dress, where the main character is also a psychotherapist in London, but otherwise it's a fiction about her quest to unpick the issues she experiences and to understand the deeper meanings. Bridget's work can be found at www.bridgetfinklaire.com. Now, for anyone who doesn't know me, very briefly, I'm Fiona Price. I've been a career entrepreneur until recently in the areas of women's business, the financial sector, and online video. And I've also competed in 2 sports at international level. I have also been on a lifelong quest to become a bigger, grander version of myself. And I have also written a book called The Ultimate Relationship, The One With Yourself, which is my story from the inside out and includes my version of practical spirituality and how to use it in everyday life. And there are audio extracts on my website, as well as blogs and podcasts. And the address is www.theultimaterelationship.co.uk. Now, Bridget and I seem to have quite a few parallels in our experience and our work. So we thought it would make an interesting conversation to explore some of the subjects that we hold dear in our personal and professional lives, and which we've written about in our respective books. So welcome, Bridget.
Thank you so much, Fiona. It's lovely to be here. And I think you're right. There's quite a few little synchronicities between us. So really great to be here with you today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Right. So shall we start off with being the best version of yourself and what that means to you?
Yes, big question. Hey, I think this is the quest that we're all after and really the purpose that we're here. I believe that we are here to grow. We're here to grow at soul level. This is just the meat suit that we inhabit for this particular lifetime. And we've chosen, I believe, this life, this circumstances that we created or set up, so to speak, in order to give us challenges, in order for us to grow through those challenges. So being the best version of yourself for me is to become more spiritual, to become more connected with your higher self, with your over self, whatever you want to call that, with your soul self or your greater self. In the Bone Circle, we call that greatness. So we have a greatness, we have a pure creative spirit that came here to learn and grow. And we then also got a small self, an ego self, that gets trapped into the conditioning and all the thoughts and feelings, and I'm not good enough, and I can't do that, and nobody's going to love me, and I don't belong, I'm powerless, all of these sorts of things. And that's the drag that holds us back. So becoming your best self for me is a 2-pronged thing, really. It's partly about reaching upwards and outwards to grow towards that pure creative spirit that we truly are, which is connected to a much greater reality that we can't even explain fully. And it's also about healing or letting go of or becoming aware of the things that hold us back and keep us small. So I think it's a thing where we're constantly evolving if we choose that path. Not everybody chooses that path, but it's such a fabulous path if you step into choosing to be the best version of yourself. And of course, the best version of yourself is going to change because as you progress and as you grow, you just keep learning more and more and understanding more and more. So you're raising your consciousness, expanding your consciousness, understanding more, learning more. Life becomes more synchronicities and coincidences and led and guided, which makes it more fun, which makes it more easy. Tempered with that, there's the fear that holds us back. But I think it's a choice that we make to be the best version of ourselves, and that best version just keeps evolving. Yeah. It's the most fantastic way to live.
I totally agree with you in terms of the small picture and the big picture. And it does help to have an insatiable appetite to know more and to be more. And I just sort of think from my own experience, I have been on this quest forever. And I suppose when I think back, my classrooms or my working laboratories have been business, sport, my animals, nature. And, so I've sort of always thought, when things go wrong, okay, how did that go wrong? Where did it go off the tracks? How do I change it or myself or the situation so that, you neutralize conflict? Especially, you don't carry the negative damaging energy with you in your life. You sort of travel as light as you can, emotionally. And so, yeah, I think also patterned responses, understanding your patterned responses so that you can actually change them, and not invoke those same unpleasant situations in the future. So where did it start for you? Where did you actually realize that you were sort of on a bit of a quest on this?
Oh gosh, I think it's quite hard to put your finger on exactly where it starts, because I think when you look back with more awareness, you see that this kind of always been there to some degree. I think, though, in consciously working with that, there's probably a watershed for me. I think before that I was dabbling with things, and I always believed that there was more to life than we could see with our five senses. I always believed in the supernatural, that we had guidances that were spirit guides and near-death experiences and all of that. What some people might say is woo-woo stuff, but I kind of always believed that was there, but I didn't know how to put that into practice. So it wasn't really until my children were born that I was able to start saying, okay, let's start working with this stuff. And I think it was just becoming a mother and giving up, a fast-paced career in London, to become a mother at the age of 30. And it was really having the second baby, actually. The first baby was just a whirlwind of trying to deal with motherhood. But my second child, my son, it was like, okay, well, I've got two children now. I'm firmly a mother. I'm clearly not going to go back into the world of public relations, which is where I used to work. And I it got to a point where there was the opportunity to possibly go back to work. And I thought, I can't do this. It's not where my soul is. And there was this moment, my whole insides were kind of going, whoa, I don't want to do this. I want to do something else. And it led then to me examining, as you said, you said some really interesting things, actually. Just almost wanted to go back to those. That you've got to neutralize the conflict and change the patterns. And I think it depends on the person. Some people are going to have more to neutralize and other people are going to have less. And you have to be kind of curious and inquisitive and aware to start to see what those patterns are. Well, I sort of discovered by having children and being at home and being still and not being like going at 100 miles an hour, that actually I had quite a few issues. I had quite a few things that had come from my childhood, quite a lot of awful patterns that was really stopping me in a lot of different ways. And a lot of, I would call that conditioning. A lot of conflict, a lot of the small voice going, you can't do that. So that was the first place of starting for me. Actually, I always had a parallel road. It's interesting. My name is Bridget, and I always feel like bridge these two roads. I always had this parallel road. Even at school, I loved science and arts. And it was like, on the one hand, I actually went and had therapy and counselling because I wanted to get to the bottom of it, because I really felt there was something wrong and I wanted to be the best mum I could be. So it started off with me doing something for somebody else, not for me. It wasn't about me being the best me. It was about me being the best mum I could be. So I had therapy, but I simultaneously started working with energy. Actually started working with space clearing and energy clearing and feng shui and qigong and tai chi. And there was these I just thought that was me having an interest, and the other one was me healing myself. And eventually, as time went on, I always had these two paths of kind of energy and healing, and then kind of therapy, because eventually I became a therapist, actually trained in therapy, and eventually those two paths came together. So that's kind of how I set off on the journey.
Yeah, it's so interesting how people do. I mean, mine was very different because I was doing sport at international level from about the age of 17, rowing. And, there was no way that somebody of my sort of small stature should have been able to be any good at a sport like that, because I was frequently competing against women who were 6 foot and, much bigger and bulkier and stronger. But I really worked on my whole psychological preparation at a time when, psychology wasn't in sport. I mean, we're talking the 70s and the 80s. And the visualization and getting through the pain of every competition, because it was, you go through the pain barrier when you were every single time. So I think that idea of visualization was where it started for me. And when you actually then realize the power of that, of course, that starts to open the bigger picture. What else is there? And like you, I had always known there was more, and I was interested in all of the alternative modalities. And although there was nothing wrong with me, I would go and have a session of this, that, and the other just to know what it was like. And then in the end, I studied something called radionics, which is a form of distance healing using a sort of numerology. And the effects of that were astounding on me, my animals, family and friends when they asked me. And the realization that all I had done was a diagnosis of using my pendulum, and we're going to talk about pendulums later, as to what was out of balance for somebody at all levels, and then putting corresponding number sequences onto a piece of paper. And that action energized a very specific frequency. And so when I saw the direct results of that, I thought, holy smoke, the power of thought is phenomenal. That was absolute proof for me. And then that sort of went to things like amputating a finger and having to stop it bleeding and heal it and all the rest of it, and practicing on myself. I don't suggest anyone tries that. I mean, start with a bruise. And so
don't go overboard.
No, don't go overboard. And so then it sort of translated into all aspects of my life, which was, my business, my animals, connecting with nature and so on. So, yeah, I think it starts somewhere, but we sort of get to the same place through very different journeys, which is understanding that we are part of something which is much greater, and that there is a way of tapping into this multidimensional divine intervention if we want to use that to make our life easier, happier, more effective, and so on.
Absolutely, I'm on the same page as you there. And like you, I did a lot of different trainings and a lot of different. First of all, I actually went to lots of different therapists. I'm going to try this, and I'd try something, Bowen technique or whatever it was, or this healing or that healing, and I'd go to people to have these sessions. And particularly when I first became a therapist, because you do need that support, and I didn't want to go to another therapist and sit there and talk about my problems, which you actually do have to do at the beginning. I would rather go to an energy healer. So I did a lot of different modalities, and then I also did a lot of different trainings and read a lot of books. So, it is a path, and I think you're right about everybody's path is different, but I see it as if it's a pyramid and we're all going towards the apex. But you might be on the west side and I might be on the north side, and your path is going to be completely different to mine. And there's no right or wrong. Your path is your path, and the way that you're guided and towards each thing.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And actually, isn't it great that in this day and age we can talk openly about all of these things? Because when we started our journey all those years ago, it wasn't a discussion that you had with almost anyone. You sort of questioned your own sanity at times to think that there was more than what seemed in life. You read books, you went on courses, but really, it was not something that was talked about. And now at least we can share all these experiences and realize we weren't off our trolley. So
absolutely. And again, in Red Dress, she talks about she realizes it's like a secret society of people, but that she can't talk about that to her husband or her family. They're all going to laugh at her and humiliate her. And she's sitting on the fence. The character is Katie because of that, because people are going to laugh at me and think I'm crazy, and she's teetering on the brink, and she decides that she can only tell certain people, and those people she ends up calling them Moses, the movement of spiritually enlightened souls.
How lovely.
So that's her little group of people.
Well, I mean, it's not completely dissimilar today, except that group of special people is a much wider group, and now there are so many forums that you can, specialist forums. So, now I actually want to move on to something that we've, again, both experienced. Does success equal happiness? Because we've both experienced success in conventional terms. Where did that lead us, and what did we think about it? So I'll let you kick off with that one.
Thank you. Great question again, Fiona. Again, if I just point to Red Dress, it is a fiction, but it's very loosely based on my life. And I did have that life, like I know you did as well, of living in London and being successful and having and in fact, for me, I had the house and the man and the kids, and the career and all the rest of it. And that kind of success for me does not bring happiness. And I think that's true for a lot of people. I think what you've got to go back and do is redefine success. So if success for you is being fulfilled and being happy and enjoying your life, then go for that and find it. And when you find that, you will be successful and in the paradigm of that definition, and you will find happiness. But I think for most people, we're conditioned to believe that success is basically about money and having money and having things and, having lovely holidays and nice cars and nice houses in a nice part of wherever, and being married to someone lovely and having children, or maybe not. I know that you don't have children, and that's a perfectly valid choice for many, many people. But there's so many people that find that when they got to the top of the pinnacle, we even see this with a lot of famous people that say, actually, if you want to know, it's not, if you think money and fame is success, it isn't. If you think it's happiness, it isn't. And we see that. So no, I don't think success in the conventional way we think of it equals happiness at all. I think it can be very hollow unless you happen to have hit on the right thing in the first place. If you're doing something that's your sole purpose and you're creating something new and you're breaking new ground with it and you absolutely love every moment of it and you're excited to get up in the morning because that's your passion, yes, then success is happiness. But if you're going through the motions of something but you're not really enjoying it, you're just doing it for the exterior material success, you're on the wrong track. Your ladder's against the wrong wall.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're so right. And it takes courage to step outside of the paradigm of what is conventional, whether it's speaking your truth, the last point we were talking about, and, your spiritual life, or whether it is actually redefining what success means. I mean, for me, I had early success in business. I had a house in London, swapped the man for a horse. I was living in perpetual motion, frenetic, exciting. I was on a mission. I was passionate about doing something that I'd created from start that was breaking new ground. But a friend turned around one day and said, "But Fiona, are you happy?" And it totally floored me because I hadn't ever stopped to think what happy meant. I didn't know what happy meant. So really, that was quite a defining moment. And although I was on a mission and I loved what I did and I couldn't wait to get out of bed in the morning, there were still things that were missing. I could see that there were still things that were missing. And I think, we have to say, well, what does happy feel like? Because the feeling of happiness is pretty much a constant. It can be more intense or less intense, but it's the same sort of vibe. What changes are the circumstances of our life. And so that affects our happiness. And I think we have to constantly review, how do we feel and what needs to change? Where is the balance wrong, so that we can maintain enough happiness in our life?
For sure. And that requires awareness, doesn't it? That requires awareness of what happiness is. And, many people say, well, happiness comes from within. And to some extent it does. And I think if you go on a spiritual journey and you start to heal some of that conditioning, some of those patterns we talked about, some of those limiting beliefs and conflicts, when you start to heal some of that and you come more into alignment with your higher self and what you're doing and your purpose, I think you intrinsically feel a bit happier. And if you start to work with stillness and nature and things like that, and meditation and nature, you can start to build happiness within, but it always gets rocked by something outside. So I think it's a constant honing, isn't it, to see what needs to shift both within and without.
Yeah, and I think that's part and parcel of the becoming a bigger, grander version of yourself. It's part of this quest. I do also think that if you're in a situation where you're not necessarily, living your passion, or circumstances aren't exactly as you would like, then your happiness quotient does depend on how you respond to your circumstances. The quest to find peace in whatever circumstances we're in, it may not be ideal circumstances, but we can still find an amount of peace, and then actually that makes for a bit more happiness. So yeah, I think it's an infinite subject, but we touched on change here, and I want to go on to that as my next conversation, because change is one of the constants in life. And of course, it's scary. And we don't usually stick our hands up and say, over here, me, I want change, I want change. More typically, we resist it until our back is against the wall. Now, I have a very sort of bring it on attitude. So I've experienced an awful lot of change in my life and a lot of pain as a result of that. And so I've worked very hard to actually try and recognize the telltale signs and see if there's a process in that you can actually take on board and start to manage. What would your experience be?
Really interesting again. I think the first thing is, there's probably a difference between change that you initiate and want and change that's thrust upon you. So if it's a change that you want, I want to change career, or I want to give up my job and have a family, or I want to, go and live in another country, say, or any other manner. I want to change my life. I'm a single person, I want to get married, or I'm a married person, I want to be single, or I want to own my own horse. Those sorts of changes are much easier to negotiate because there's something that you're going for, that you're certain of, that you want to do. So in a way, you feel as though you're still in control of that change. But when a change is thrust upon you from the outside, I think that's when it's really scary, because you feel out of control and there's nothing much you can do. But let's talk about positive change, because I think that's where you're talking about. And you're quite right to say that change is constant. Change is the only constant in the universe. Everything is constantly changing, and you either become a stick in the mud and try and stop the flow, and it's be like standing in a river and not going with the flow, or you're trying to go upstream against the flow, which is exhausting, or you go with the flow of change. So that's the first thing I want to say about it. And the second thing is about noticing the signposts and what you go through. The model that I work with in the Bone Circle is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And I also work with Maureen Murdock's heroine's journey. So Joseph Campbell, maybe you're familiar with him, but Joseph Campbell was a mythologist. He taught mythology for many years. He's passed away now. I think it was about 40 odd years that he was he's the absolute guru on mythology. And he looked at comparative religions and comparative mythology from across the world. And he found that they all had the same structure, underlying structure within it. And that structure he called the monomyth, because it's in all of them. And it's become known as the hero's journey. Now, we see the hero's journey in films and books. And in fact, the most popular films and top grossing books and films are almost always a completely perfect hero's journey. So Harry Potter, The Matrix, Star Wars, they're all pretty much perfect hero's journeys. But we all have our own hero's journey to take. And for me, the hero's journey is the external journey. So it starts with the call to adventure. And the call to adventure is where you feel that there must be more to life than this. And you've got stale, and you feel like you're in a rut. And there's a sense of ennui about your life, like You're going through the motions of it. So the first thing is that sort of sense of there's something more, the call to adventure. And the second thing is then the idea comes of what you want to do, the vision or the idea. Well, I'm going to go and live in the country and rewild myself, whatever it is. I'm going to go and live in South Africa. It might be small things, by the way. It doesn't have to be huge, great leaps of faith. A bit like, don't lop your finger off to try their healing. Just start with a bruise. You don't have to move country or to start with this stuff. Just change something small. But the minute you decide to change, you'll start to get resistance. And in the hero's journey, we call that threshold guardians. And what they're doing is testing your conviction to see if you're going to do it. Are you man or mouse? Are you woman or mouse? Are you going to go for this or not? And it's normally things like, I don't really have the time. Don't really have the money. Or, I'm busy doing this other thing at the moment. They're like little excuses, and they're resistance to go on the journey. And in the Matrix, it's whether he takes the red pill or the blue pill. So you'll see it in films and books once you know the hero's journey. And then you kind of once you've stepped through that, and you go, no, I'm going to do it. And you've got the conviction to do it. Then you stop battling your own demons, which is all of your fears and doubts. All of, I'm not good enough to do this. Oh my goodness, I'm a fake. I'm an imposter. I've bitten off more than I can chew. What if I'm making a horrible mistake? What if I'm throwing my life away? Other people out there are much better than me. All of these thoughts, which are your patterns that we talked about right at the beginning, which are your conflicts within yourself, because we're always internally conflicted. come up and they rise up to almost hit you, and you battle with them for a while, and that's uncomfortable. And then in the hero's journey, you go into the abyss. And the abyss is where everything feels like it's turned to mush. Everything feels like it's fallen apart. Everything feels like you've just made a horrible mistake and it's all gone horribly wrong. And you just like want to turn back at this point, and disoriented is how it feels. What happens is if you stay with it and you stay true to what your true north is, you get resurrected by the power of love. And that's normally an insight that you gain, which helps you to grow, which enables you to take action towards the thing that you would love, the change that you would love. And then you rise and you receive your boon, which is your gold, which is the thing you wanted to create, much wiser because you've been through this journey. And then you come back to go into service to others. So I always love the hero's journey for change. The heroine's journey was written by Maureen Murdock, who understood all of Joseph Campbell's work and said, hey, that doesn't work for women. I actually think it does, because I think we all contain both masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang. So we all take both of these journeys. So she developed the heroine's journey, and that's an internal journey to reconnect with the divine feminine within. And so that's a different kind of change, which is an internal shift, an internal change, an internal searching for what's real, for what's true, for what's you.
Yeah, no, beautifully described. I mean, I think back to my own life and, what signs do I personally recognize? And it's that sort of nagging feeling, that something needs to change. If we're talking about situations where it's not thrust upon you, but you have to make the initiative in some way, shape or form, it's that nagging feeling. It's that repetitive pattern of something not happening the right way. It's that feeling of stagnation. And, that for me is this sort of heads up, you need to think about something. And if you can spot that early enough, you can reduce the pain a bit, because once you start to think about something, an issue, and you look at what's wrong with it and what all of the other different scenarios are, that starts to make you feel a little bit better. And then where you really get better, as you beautifully described just now, is when you decide on a course of action and you then start to implement the plan to achieving that goal, because now you're back in control. So you've sort of gone from a situation of feeling completely out of control and in the abyss, and now back to a feeling of in control and gaining some traction. So that's sort of how I've experienced it in my life. And I've just learned to recognize quicker and quicker the telltale sign that something isn't right. And the sooner I deal with it, the better. But I do want to just go off piste a little bit here, because you brought up the divine feminine, and it wasn't on my list of things to talk about today, but I don't know why, actually. It's a really important issue. And again, that has featured very strongly in my own journey, which I briefly describe. I came into the workplace thinking through the role models of my parents that to be very feminine also meant to be weak and to be at mercy. And there was absolutely no way I was ever going to do that. So for me, I didn't recognize the feminine at all, because I saw it as weak. And I went on to set up various businesses. I worked in, funnily enough, women's business for nearly 20 years. And after I finished my first main business, I was doing a video website where I went and interviewed, and this is a way back when video had just come onto the web. I went and interviewed nearly 100 women who were leaders in business in the UK, both intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs, to look at women's leadership. My own business had been entirely women, bar one man, so about 35 women. And our clients had been women. So although I'd come into business thinking, feminine is weak, I don't want to be that, I actually found myself, ironically, working entirely with women and becoming incredibly interested in women's leadership and women's style. And I found it was very different. So I'm in the financial sector. I've got in-your-face male power and finance and money, but I'm working in my own microcosm, which is entirely women, and I'm observing how women operate. And I realized that money and profit is not number one for women. They are team players. They are about engagement. They are about making a difference to the lives of their colleagues and their clients and their customers. And money comes probably 3 or 4 down the list. But that whole experience showed me that actually the power of the feminine was so massive. I had just misunderstood it, because that epitomized the power of the feminine. These women were doing incredible things, but they weren't doing it in a male aggressive, stand up and shout about it sort of way. So how do you respond to that?
Okay. Ooh, this is a good question. Okay, so it really, for me, the divine feminine is hugely important because it has to come back. We've been living in a patriarchal society for a very long time, and look where it's led us, in terms of that needing money and, the male ego that has to win. So it's led to competition, consumption, acquisition. It's led to greed, corruption, war. And the divine feminine is almost the antithesis of all of that. It's as if the divine feminine has been in exile and needs to come back. And I think it is coming back now. Things are rising. So I want to just speak into what you said about the feminine being weak. And this is exactly actually what the heroine's journey is. So in the heroine's journey, it's that society favours the masculine way. And so, we're women, we grow up, we go to school, we do well maybe, we go to university, or we go to college, or we do whatever we want to do, and we want to have what is deemed successful in society. So we want to go out there and earn money and have a career and have things, and we want to do it ourselves. So we set off to do that, and it's called the Road of Trials. It's called the Road of Trials in Joseph Campbell's work, and also Maureen Murdock calls it that. So we actually basically, as women, go on the external masculine journey of fighting our way to the top. And we've done really well, by the way. We've gone, a lot of places have gone past the glass ceiling. We have women prime ministers and women CEOs, and which is great since the days that you started off your work and when I was working as well. So we're doing really well. But the reason that women do that is partly because of the structure of how things are now. As you said, the structure of the men's world of money and profit coming first. But it's also exactly what you said, and we call it the mother wound. So it's because the woman rejects the mother and says, no, that's wussy, that's weak, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a housewife. I don't want to be cooking and knitting and sewing and being in the garden. That's rubbish. That's not strong. And that is the mother wound. So we've rejected the mother. And the part of the heroine's journey that goes within is to go and uncover the bones that we buried. Is to go back and reconnect with the divine and see the strength and power in the divine, because the feminine, not the divine, to see the strength and power in the feminine, because the feminine, as you said, is great at teamwork. It's collective, it's compassionate, it's empathetic. There's wisdom in women, there's kindness, there's gentleness, and there's wanting to make a difference, and there's great synergy in working together, whereas men tend not to do that. And I think that's where we have to head now. We have to head into feeling that we are a unity, we are one, actually. We are collective, and we need to look after each other, and we cannot do it. No man is an island. We cannot do these things alone. We all need help from all over the place. And if we can each bring to the party our skill, we have a whole team.
Yeah, lovely. I mean, I've got 2 points I'd like to respond to on that. Interestingly, I think when I first went to university, I did a psychology degree, and my first bit of research I did on a subject that had piqued my interest, that was never talked about really, called androgyny. And that's sort of how I felt in my life a lot of the time, that an androgyny being the ability to sort of express both male and female traits, and to do typically what would be considered typically both male and female things. And to be quite sort of able to be fully masculine or fully feminine, depending on your orientation, but at the same time, at a practical level, to cut across both. And I think in a way that's sort of where we might be heading towards in the future, because actually the divine feminine can be expressed in men and women. It's not about women having to come up with that. I mean, by and large, I guess most women will be the ones that express that, but it's about the balance of male and female in both men and women that I think we need to develop in creating a new world that we all want to move into. So that was one point. But the other is, when I was doing this website where I was interviewing these top women in business, I was really fascinated to find out how they got to the top of the ladder. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of women, who are maybe men dressed up as women do that conventional sort of thing of, this is my goal and I'm just going to get there. And, then it's not a feminine way of doing it at all. But some of these women who were absolutely at the top of multinational companies had not done it that way at all. They'd actually got their head down, just worked really, really hard, accepted every opportunity and promotion or sideways move that was offered them, not really valued their own worth sufficiently. That's not a good thing. And only when they were within a few notches of the top run did they actually think, oh, I'll go for that. So it was a much more intuitive, feminine way of getting to the top. They hadn't planned on being there, but they ended up being there. And part of that was actually taking jobs nobody else would take. They just took everything they got. So they had a much wider bird's eye view of the organization because they hadn't said, that's where I'm going, and I'm going in a straight line as best I can. They'd just gone all over the place like a mosaic.
Yeah, I just want to speak into that because I absolutely agree with you. And this is why I look at both the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, because you can't do one without the other. So it's no good saying, oh, well, men have run the show and we're in a patriarchy. Now it's got to be women. No, it's not like that. And I absolutely agree with you. It's the yin and the yang. It's the yin and the yang. They have to be in perfect balance. The left brain and the right brain have to be in perfect balance. And if we think of the masculine energy as taking action, being organized, being rational, we need that. We can think of the feminine energy as much more receiving, receptive, and also intuitive. And so we need both. There's no point having a fabulous intuitive hit to go and do something, create a business, say, for women, and then not taking the action to do it. So you've got to have both. So for me, it's about understanding where both got wounded, both the masculine and the feminine. Where did they get wounded? How do we heal that? How do we bring them into balance? And actually they become merged. They become the interplay, as the yin and yang. They just become an interplay like this that's constantly working and alternating, if you like.
Right, I'm going to go back to sort of where I was on my list and talk a little bit about changing programmed thoughts and attitudes. Now, I reckon that you have to be incredibly self-aware. It is, I call it a process of narration. I think of a little Pinocchio on my shoulder, narrating situations where I just sort of have an immediate response, whether it's a thought or a behavior. And if that's not the desired response, it's actually about noticing. You can't change something you haven't noticed. And I think where you notice the most is in a situation of change where you're outside of your comfort zone, or when you get repeating experiences in your life, like relationships that don't work out, or bosses that, always do the same thing to you. So what's your experience of that, and what techniques do you use to actually change those patterned behaviors and thoughts?
Okay, another great question. So this is really an area of a lot of expertise for me. And when I teach the bone circle, it's actually quite easy within that teaching to teach somebody how to tap into their intuition at will, and how to get the right information, and how to tap into what they're supposed to be doing, what their true north is, what their change is, what their vision is. That thing's relatively easy. What's really hard is teaching them how not to let the small self sabotage them. So to me, all of those thoughts and feelings and patterns and programming and conditioning is the small self, or the ego self, or what I would call in the bone circle, the false identity. And that's all the programming and conditioning. And that's the bit that takes the effort. It takes awareness. It takes courage to step into it. We will go into out of a comfort zone, because change always happens outside of the comfort zone. If you stay in your comfort zone, you're going to be limited. So any kind of change requires you to take that leap of faith, which means that you're going to be outside your comfort zone. And yes, things come up there, and it's a good opportunity. In the Bone Circle, I teach that everybody has these 5 limiting beliefs, which create all kinds of thoughts and feelings and patterns in infinite numbers and combinations of. And I teach that those thoughts and feelings that come from those limiting beliefs are actually not a true reflection of reality. They are just a reaction. They're just a reaction to something that's programmed inside of you. So one of the ways then that you can sort of become aware, and you're right, you have to become aware of attitudes and thoughts and emotions and feelings and underlying assumptions and definitions, and there's a lot of them. So you can become aware of them when you get triggered. So when you get triggered by something, when you feel an emotional charge, a strong emotional charge, you either feel afraid, scared, or you feel really deeply frustrated or angry or really upset. Those are things that are telling you there's something inside of you that you can need to unravel and get to the bottom of and resolve. And then there's a whole plethora of tools and ways and means of getting to the bottom and resolving it. But what it takes is to have the courage to face it. I think earlier in our conversation, we were talking about pain, and you said about the pain of things. I love this saying that pain is inherent, but suffering is optional. And if you face the pain, it's like lancing a boil. It doesn't hurt after that. It hurts, then it's gone. And in therapy, we call that abreaction. So it takes courage to look at what it is that's causing all of this. But if you don't look at what it is, you're suffering, because you're going to keep on creating those same patterns until you learn. I believe the same things happen over and over in different scenarios. It's like the same plot, but different characters in different places and different times in your life will keep repeating until you get it, until you get, this is something to do with me, I'm creating this. So that's one thing, is when we get triggered. And the other thing is we can see what our stuff is in the mirror of other people. So if we see somebody else and go, that person's really annoying, it's probably because there's something in there that's telling us something about ourselves. So that's another way of kind of discovering what's in ourselves, because it's in the shadow, so we don't always know. We want to heal the big things that are stopping us, the really biggies, like I'm really not good enough, I can't do this, or I'm absolutely powerless, or I have to be perfect and I'm not perfect and I'm going to get taken out, or these big fears and these big patterns are always going for the wrong man, I always get passed over in my career, I have a lot of bad luck. Whatever those patterns are, we do need to look at those and resolve them. But it's a bit like a kind of looking at a big forest. We don't have to take all the trees down, we just have to take the big ones.
It is an onion that lasts a lifetime and many more, and you just peel off the layers. But as you say, you pick off the big fruit first, and then, the rest you start to sort of see the subtleties. You see with greater perception, with greater awareness, with greater experience of dealing with perhaps the big issues, which is the obvious place to start. But I've used, if you talk about how do you change these patterns, once you know them, and that process, as you say, is the most difficult, what are the practical things that you do to change them? And for me, one of the things I've used massively are affirmations. So I would make an affirmation of the positive aspect of that behavior that I want to change, and make it very succinct and make it sound like it is now in the present tense. It is something I already am or already have. And I think that with everything, not just the tangible, practical things like learning to ride a bike or learning to drive a car or learning a skill, with the invisible things, with the subtle things, it's every bit as important to practice. Practice makes perfect, or as my rowing coach said years ago, perfect practice makes perfect. So I think that people underestimate the amount of hard work that it takes to change the habits of a lifetime that don't serve you, because, as you said, the small self catches the big self out time and time again, and basically you forget, you slip back, and you have to have this awareness, oh my God, I just lost that, I lost it, and get back to something, have a technique you can pick up really quickly to help you get back onto the straight and narrow. So I feel that's a very good way, it's a good launching pad for new intentions. Right, let's move to the biggie, where a lot of this comes together. And in fact, it's not possible to do the biggie really until you've done a lot of the other stuff. So the art of manifestation, consciously creating the health you want, consciously creating the life you want, and all that involves. Now, I have sort of discovered in my own experience that there is a particular line of events that has to happen, and I'll just briefly explain it, and then I would love to know what you do or what you teach. So in the first instance, it is about having a vision, a passion of some sort, and developing that, fantasizing about that, and embellishing it in your imagination. It probably starts with just a little kernel of an idea, and that's how the really biggies and good ideas start, is a tiny little thing, and you spend time on it, you embellish it, you visualize, and it becomes so powerful that it almost in the end becomes like your alternative reality, your parallel reality. You can almost reach out and touch it. So that is the first thing, that you energize through your imagination something which sort of sends up an antenna almost to, the divine intervention that's available. And then if you're balanced and you are connected with your instinct, and you need to be connected with your instinct to find the synchronicities that lead you to that manifestation, then you can make something happen at the right moment in time, because timing is another factor. So the minute you lose your balance, or you get into fear of not having something, or it's not happening quick enough, then you sort of close the door, because that antenna comes down, and that antenna is the thing in the field of possibilities that connects you synchronistically to the people and information and situations you need to realize this vision that you have. So that's sort of my really pithy, distilled essence of the process of manifestation.
Yeah, I think you're pretty much on the ball there with it. I like to make a distinction between manifesting and creating. So, for me, it's part of that whole divine feminine and masculine, the yin and the yang, because you have to create, and you said purposefully create. You used the word purposefully create my health, or purposefully create. That's a creative function, which is you doing something on purpose, taking action. And the first action you took is to get the vision, and then to develop it and embellish it, and create it as if it's a reality, and be in the I would say be in the vibration of it, as if it's a parallel, this is your words, a parallel reality, and energizing it. But then you said there's synchronicities and coincidences that come to you. Those are the manifestations. So supposing I wanted to, one of the things that a lot of people want to create is a relationship. Supposing I want to create a relationship. I first of all have to have a vision for that. It's no good just going on, whatever it is, dating apps, or going somewhere and meeting somebody. That's not going to do it, because you're just going to end up in the same pattern you've always had. So the first thing is you've got to create the vision of the passion of what it wants, and develop it and embellish it, exactly what you said, and get into the vibration of what is it I really want in a relationship. And only then can you start seeing the synchronicities, and you have to follow up on them. Then you know where you're going, and that's your vision that you talked about. And then how you develop it and embellish that is you work with it intuitively, and you step into it as if it's happening now. So you start to use all of your senses. It's not just a visual sense. You're looking at, how does this feel? What does it sound like? What does it smell? You don't even go through it in that mechanical way. It's a holistic process of, as you said, embellishing it. So you see more and more and more facets of that. And we do that by a tuning in process, so that we're getting more and more information. But what we also do is we set up tension, because you actually need tension to create. It's like when you were a kid and you went into your exams. If you had no butterflies about your exams, you wouldn't have crammed, and you wouldn't have passed them. You just, anything that you feel a bit nervous about is great, because those nerves they're the fuel that fuels the performance, that fuels you. So you need to have a little bit of tension. And we do that by setting up the tension between your greatness and your vision, and what you've sensed into, embellished, and to use your words, and become so powerful. And we actually say it's not just an alternative universe, it's already happened in time and space. There's just a time lag. It's already there. The train has left the station. And then we set up tension between that and the small identity, false identity that goes, I can't do that. How am I going to do this? And we see what's playing out in there, and it creates a tension. And then what we do is we intuitively create an action step, an intuitive action step, because the universe applauds action. And when we take action towards what's true, the universe responds with giving us another bit. So you're energetically creating it, and then you're just in the time lag of matter to create it. So then what you have to do is you have to be open to the synchronicities and the opportunities that just come and hit you in the face. in the groove of your own intuitive mind. It's like a groove. It's like you're riding an energy wave. You have to trust your heart, not your head, and your gut. I mean, we have gut instinct as well. We feel things in our bodies. And how we get that instinct or intuition or whatever you want to call it is multiple different ways. So sometimes people feel it in their body. Sometimes people hear a voice. Sometimes people see a vision. Sometimes people just know. They suddenly know, I know, I've got to contact so-and-so, or whatever it is. And then these synchronicities come up, but we have to be able to follow the breadcrumbs, to follow these instinct, well, I would call them intuitive hits. And we have to be open to doing that, and we have to be brave enough to follow them. And as you say, you can only do that when you're in balance, which means that you're not stuck in your thoughts and feelings and panicking. You've got to find that sweet spot in the middle of having the tension you need to create it, but not so overwhelming you can't deal with it. And that allows you to take this journey, to see the synchronicities, to follow the guidance, the breadcrumbs, the intuitive hits, the instinct, the flashes of inspiration, and actually run with them. And that's when you create magic.
Instinct is something which we have to rediscover for ourselves, because our whole education system and our society values intellect over instinct and rewards intellect. So actually, like all of these subjects, it is a question of the real education is what you teach yourself, or what you give to yourself, sadly. And, you know, just in sort of concluding, I would say that, you know, one day maybe education will also include the really important things in life. Anyway, Bridget, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much.